Okay, welcome to our fourth week of Psych 235, Child Psychology. Today we're talking about the first 2 years. We're still talking about the first 2 years, but now we're going to be talking about psychosocial development. It's basically psychological, if you want to think of it that way, except that it's also affected by the social environment. Other things matter, okay? So we are going to be talking about this right here. Some interesting things. We're going to talk about personality development. And when it comes to personality development, we're going to stick to the stages within these theories that are mentioned here that relate to those first 2-3 years maybe, okay? And then we're going to talk about infant relationships. We're going to talk about how bonds are established. And we're going to talk about attachment. And that's about as far as we'll get. I will probably leave attachment and the other stuff until Thursday. Okay, but there's some interesting things there. So why don't we get started? Okay, so let's talk about personality development. First, we're going to talk about Freud's psychoanalytic theory. Okay, there's a picture of Freud right there in his later years. Freud's psychoanalytic theory. So we're only going to talk about like birth to about maybe 3 years of age. Okay, and that concerns two of Freud's stages that are in his theory. Two of Freud's stages of his psychoanalytic theory, the oral stage and the anal stage. And you probably heard something about this from Psych 101, but I'm going to remind you, maybe even tell you more than you knew back then, okay? So first stage of Freud's psychoanalytic theory is the oral stage, okay? And it's called the oral stage because the dominant source of pleasure during the oral stage is the mouth. Infants, newborns, primarily derive pleasure through the mouth, through sucking, breastfeeding. When they start developing teeth, they start biting, and they'll bite on mommy's breast. They'll bite the ball. They'll bite their toys. They'll even bite their siblings. So they seem to enjoy things that have to do with the mouth: sucking, biting, swallowing, eating. Drinking, but we're not talking about alcohol here, of course, that kind of stuff. That's the dominant source of pleasure. So most of their energy, according to Freud, is going to the mouth. That's how they derive pleasure. Now, that's what's happening during infancy, during birth, okay? I mean, after birth, in, first couple of years there, a lot of it centers around the mouth. But as you get older, you might develop problems down the road if things don't go well during the oral stage. So Freud called these problems are said to result from something Freud called fixation. Okay, fixation means that you are stuck. You're basically stuck at an earlier stage of functioning. And if you're stuck at the oral stage of functioning, that means that now that you're older, maybe as an adult or young adult, maybe. You are basically, you have an oral fixation. And there's two forms that could take. You might be what's called oro-incorporative. Oro means, has to do with the mouth. Incorporate means you kind of take in things through the mouth. So some examples might be that you're really concerned with eating, okay? You tend to overeat and you overindulge in food. You're like that infant that still derives most of his or her pleasure through the mouth. Or it could be drinking as well, okay? It could be alcohol or other things like smoking or drug use, things that go primarily through the mouth. You still derive most of your pleasure in that way, just like an infant. Although an infant wouldn't be doing these things, we're talking about grown-ups here, but the problem stems from the oral stage, according to Freud. Or maybe you're really into kissing. Some teenagers are, really into that stuff, and they're always kissing, always making out. Freud would say that's an oral fixation. They shouldn't really be that way. They're functioning like infants, still getting most of their pleasure through the mouth. Now, personality-wise, if you are oral-incorporative, you're probably very optimistic. In other words, optimistic, gullible, passive, okay? Dependent on others and oral objects. So let me explain that. If you have an oral fixation, if you're oral-incorporative, your personality is basically that you're like that infant that's very passive and gullible. You think things are going to be okay, so you're optimistic. You were well taken care of as an infant, so you're optimistic. You're gullible and passive, just like that infant, right? That's bottle fed and taken care of. You're kind of like that. You believe people, you trust in people, but you're passive. You just let people take care of you. Let people kind of, you know, do things for you. You're dependent on others. That's also, you know, part of being passive. So you're like that infant that's still being fed, still being taken care of. You rely on others and oral objects, you know, things you can put in your mouth, basically, to feel good. You know, that's oral incorporated, okay? But however, you can also be oral aggressive. If things didn't go well during the oral stage, you can be oral aggressive or sadistic. This usually happens because infants experience hatred, frustration during teething. So when they start developing teeth, that can be painful. So some infants, you know, don't really like that, and that causes problems during the oral stage. Or it could be something that's not mentioned here, that maybe your needs weren't met as an infant during the oral stage. You were neglected, you know, your oral needs weren't satisfied. The sucking, the swallowing, the biting, you know, the drinking, you know, breast milk, and of course formula, that kind of stuff, wasn't really met. So as an adult, you're kind of stuck at this stage because you were deprived. You know, you didn't get what you needed. So you're still looking to satisfy yourself in an oral way, okay? So you're very pessimistic. Personality-wise, you're pessimistic. You don't believe in people because things didn't go well during the oral stage. You're hostile, you're aggressive, right? And cruel, but hostile and aggressive with your mouth, okay? You say mean things. You make sarcastic, biting remarks as an adult. So things didn't go well, so you're still focused on things that have to do with the mouth, but you're mean about it, okay? And you're not optimistic, you're pessimistic. That's the oral stage of Freud's theory. That's what he said. So infants primarily receive, you know, pleasure through the mouth. And then if that doesn't go very well, you know, or you become, if you like it too much, you can become oral incorporated. If things don't go well, you can become oral aggressive. Of course, you could be somewhere in between, which means that you are healthy and you don't have these problems. The second stage of Freud's psychoanalytic theory is called the anal stage, 1.5 to about 3 years of age, or 1 to about 2 years of age, depending on which book you read. But it's, you know, it's like that, those, you know, usually 2 to 3 years, somewhere around there, okay? Now the pleasure area is the anus, okay? But it really has to do with potty training, okay? It's about control, it's about excretion. So during this time, around 2 years of age to about 3, what happens is that children are potty trained. And parents tell you that now it's time for you to basically go in that potty. So they get you a little toy potty and they want you to use it. So they want you to learn to control when you poop, when you pee. So it's potty training that takes place during this time. And according to Freud, that is crucial. That is important because some people like this control more than others, okay? The pleasure area is the anus, but it's really about controlling, you know, the excretion, controlling, you know, yourself during potty training. That's what it's about. As an adult, if you had problems during the anal stage, during potty training, you could say, you might have a fixation. You might be anal retentive, which means that you like control too much. What happened is that as an infant, you're one of those that really took to potty training really easily. You like to control yourself, okay? And you learned potty training really easily. So you're a very controlling person. As an adult, it kind of shows. You're stuck at this anal stage. You like control too much, just like during potty training. So you're very orderly, very stubborn, very stingy. And you might have OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder, or you're just very controlling and you want things your way all the time. And you tell people what to do and you think people should, you know, do things your way, and you drive people crazy, basically. You're very controlling. That's anal retentive, okay? You like control too much. It's like you're stuck at that anal stage during potty training and you're really liking, you know, that sense of control that you gain during the anal stage. There are others that don't like the control at all, don't like to control themselves. And they can become what's called anal expulsive or anal aggressive. So they have too little control. They didn't like potty training, They didn't like being told, you know, when to do something or what to do. So they hated potty training. They were very difficult to potty train. And as adults, they're anal expulsive, anal aggressive. They don't like to control themselves. So they're messy, wasteful, cruel, destructive, even aggressive. They don't control themselves. And that's also a problem when you're at that extreme, okay? If you have too little control. Some control is good. You should be a little controlling, not too much, okay? It's good to try to control some things in your life, but not to be too controlling or not to control things at all. And then you just basically do whatever you want, you know, and you're messy, wasteful, and you don't care what people say or think or whatever it is. That's also not good. So those are the types of fixations you can have during the anal stage, okay? If you like control too much, you become anal retentive or very controlling. If you didn't like control very much at all, then you become anal expulsive, anal aggressive, which means you don't care, you don't control yourself, you do whatever you want. And both of those are unhealthy. Those are the stages that pertain to Freud's personality theory. Now let's talk about Erikson's theory of personality. Birth to first 3 years. Erikson's theory actually spans the entire lifespan from birth until death. But we're only going to talk about the first 3 years or so because that's the stage of development that we're at. So it's similar to, in some ways, to Freud's theory, at least some of the names here. The first stage is called the oral sensory stage, birth to about 1 year of age. Oral sensory. So according to Erikson, the infant is dependent on the mother for survival, security, for affection. You know, the infant's born completely helpless, needs to be fed, needs to be taken care of. And if things go well during the oral sensory stage, then the infant will develop a sense of trust, okay? Which means that the mother met the infant's needs. So the infant basically developed a sense of trust. The infant has learned that things are okay and things are going to be okay. So they learn to expect consistency, continuity, sameness from other people in the environment. So they believe things are going to be okay. Mommy, daddy, mostly mommy, took good care of them. So they, you know, they learn to expect that things are going to be okay. They are trusting. They trust their mommies, their daddy, and they're more likely to trust others down the road. That's where you get the sense of trust from, according to Erikson, because these you will carry with you into adulthood. Okay, and if things go well during the oral sensory stage, then you learn to trust people. If things don't go very well, you develop a sense of mistrust. This is when the mother doesn't meet those needs, neglects the child, maybe is mean to the child, or abandons the child, or any number of things can go wrong. In this case, the child will not basically develop that sense of trust. Will instead develop mistrust, and the child will be rejecting of the mother, rejecting of others, won't trust people, okay? Inattentive and will show inconsistent behavior because they don't really trust people. They didn't learn to trust, so they don't develop a good relationship with their mother, with their father, whoever it was that didn't meet their needs. And as they get older, they will not easily trust people. They don't trust teachers or authority figures or others, and they're more likely to have problems with their relationships down the road because they didn't learn to trust. So that's the first stage, called the oral sensory stage. And then the second stage is called the muscular anal stage. So again, we have, you know, the word anal there, similar to Freud's theory in some ways, but for Erikson's theory, it's a bit more social, a bit more about, you know, the non-biological things. During the muscular anal stage, children are developing physical and mental abilities. They're learning, you know, they learn how to walk. They start learning how to walk a little bit before this, walking, talking, and you should add there, it's not there, but potty training, just like in Freud's theory. Yes, potty training is also crucial. The important thing is that children are learning to do things on their own, okay? They're learning to basically, you know, walk and talk, learning how to use the potty. And if things go well, they develop a sense of autonomy. Autonomy means that they can do things on their own, okay? If the parents do a good job teaching the child when and where to exercise that independence, right? When and where, you know, they can like basically use the potty. You know, they do a good job with potty training. It has a lot to do with potty training, like Freud's theory. You know, when they can do things, basically, then the child will develop a sense of autonomy. You know, look at me, I'm a big boy, right? Or a big girl, I know how to use the potty, right? So it has to do with those kinds of things. If the parents do a good job of guiding and teaching the children, they'll develop a sense of autonomy. And this sense of autonomy you will carry with you down the road, right? You will feel like you can do things on your own, okay? You're gonna need that when you're older. If things don't go very well during this stage, children can develop shame and doubt. The parents frustrate the child's attempts for independence. They're too mean, too punishing. Let's say when it comes to potty training. So the child will feel very shameful, very doubtful about him or herself. And, you know, they will carry that shame and doubt with them when they are adults. So it will affect your personality during adulthood. That is what we are talking about, the development of personality. So that's what Erickson said. Let's talk about John Watson, behaviorism. This theory is easier to understand. The principles of it are simple. Remember, behaviorism from Psych 101, it's that theory that says that everything is learned, okay? Everything is learned. The way you think, the way you behave, the way you are is learned. Your personality is learned if we apply it to personality. And we learn things through reinforcement, punishment, and social learning. Behaviorism mostly cares about reinforcement and punishment. So reinforcement, you can think of that as a reward, okay? That's one type of reinforcement. There's other kinds, but we won't get into those complications. But for instance, a male child is rewarded for boy behavior. So a male child is rewarded, you know, when he, you know, runs around, when he rides his bike, when he plays, let's say outside, you know, and he throws things, kicks a ball, that kind of stuff. Dresses like a boy, he's dressed like a boy. He's rewarded for that kind of behavior. So the child learns to behave like a boy, right? Develops that, you know, stereotypical boy personality, right? Boys are aggressive, assertive. They like to play outside. You know, they like physical contact because they are reinforced in that way, according to Watson, okay? They're also punished for behavior that is unwanted behavior. The male child can be punished for acting like a girl, punished for basically crying. You know, the child is basically, you know, yelled at or made fun of for crying, you know, punished for crying basically, or punished basically for playing with dolls, or punished for putting on a dress and acting like a girl. So children are shaped basically by rewards and punishments, and that's why they develop their personality. And you can see there's some very strong differences between males and females as to how they behave, and according to Watson, all that stuff is learned. It's not true that it's all learned. There are biological tendencies as well, but they said everything was due to learning. You can also develop a certain way because of social learning. You don't have to be directly reinforced or punished for you to learn to behave a certain way. You can just watch somebody else behaving in that way and see what happens. So a male child can observe, you know, that boys play with trucks, and you know, the boys have fun playing with those trucks, and that they are encouraged. So the child will basically decide that he should play with trucks as well, because he sees that's what other boys do, and when they do that, you know, they don't get punished, or maybe they even get rewarded, okay, with smiles and attention, that kind of stuff. So we learn our personalities, basically, according to behaviorism, according to Watson. Reinforcement and punishment, okay? Social learning, that would be more social learning theory. Behaviorism just strictly believes in reinforcement and punishment, but it's the same kind of thing. Reinforcement and punishment are also occurring during social learning. The only difference is that you are observing someone. You don't necessarily have to experience the rewards and punishment directly yourself. All right, let's keep going. Epigenetic theory. This is a different kind of theory, and it brings us to some interesting things about personality development during these first 2 years. Epigenetic theory, it's really temperament that we're going to talk about. And separate theory that falls within epigenetic theory is temperament theory. A child's temperament is basically their personality at birth. Research has shown that children have certain tendencies at birth. Even as newborns, you can see some things about them. You can note some things about them that, you know, you can tell some children are different than others. So they look at emotionally, what is the child like? Some children are more emotional than others. Right from the beginning, you can see that. Motor has to do with movement. Some children are more active than others. Some children pay more attention than others. And self-regulating. Some children regulate themselves differently than others. We'll talk about what that refers to, but those are the things that temperament theory has to do with. Your temperament is your basic personality at birth. It's not well developed yet, but there are certain tendencies that we see in children, in newborns, and they have to be biological because the children haven't learned anything yet. The child's temperament may fit well or poorly with the social environment. And we'll talk about that again when we finish temperament. But yeah, the child may be a good fit for the environment or not. We'll talk about that. Temperament will affect how the child perceives, how the child basically perceives and understands their world, right? And how the child reacts to the environment. And that can be, of course, somewhat genetic because children haven't learned anything yet. It will affect how the child interacts with their environment, okay, how they respond to things, and how they evolve and how they're going to be down the road, how their personality is going to develop. Personality traits are stable and persistent. So their basic personality at birth will develop, it will evolve, but you'll see you see the pattern already, and that will kind of persist and turn into their full-blown personality later on. So let's talk more about this temperament and the different kinds that exist. There's a study that is called the New York Longitudinal Study. It's a study, I guess, that was done in New York where they looked at a bunch of infants, and they found that there's 4 types of temperament. There's 4 basic personality types that we can see at birth. There are your so-called easy children. Now, easy children are, well, they're easy to raise. They're easy to take care of. These are children that have a regularity when it comes to body functions. In other words, they get sleepy at normal, regular times, and they are consistent. They get hungry at around the same time, okay? They go to the bathroom at around the same time, so they're very regular. And that makes them easier to handle, easier to deal with, okay? They are consistent. Low to moderate intensity of their reaction. So when there is something new or something, or there's something, they will react, you know, and low to moderate way. That means that they are not extreme in their reactions, and they're not totally emotionally blunted, meaning they don't react at all. Okay, they're somewhere in the middle, which is good. Okay, acceptance rather than withdrawal from new situations. That means that they can adapt to new situations. You know, it could be that maybe people come to visit and they don't just cry because they see somebody new. Or let's say they go to preschool, or they start school later on, or daycare, more likely because they're young at this point. They, you know, they accept those new situations and they adapt. It doesn't mean they won't cry when there's something new, but they'll adapt more easily, okay? Those are your so-called easy children. They're easier to raise. They're more regular, okay? Not too emotional, not too unemotional either. About 40% of children fall into this category. And then you have your difficult children that are gonna be, well, difficult to raise, and they'll drive you nuts. Their personalities are different, and you can see that right from the beginning. They're irregular in their body functions. So in other words, they drive you crazy, okay? They don't have a normal sleep pattern at the beginning, okay? They wake up at all times of the night, or they're, you know, they just, it's hard to get them into a pattern so that you can sleep, you know, during your normal time. So they're irregular also when it comes to feeding. They get hungry at different times. When it comes to, you know, toileting, you know, using, peeing and pooping, they are irregular. So they're more difficult to predict and difficult to deal with because of that. Intense reactions. They get easily upset, they cry easily, and it's intense and very stressful to deal with these children. Withdrawal from new stimuli. Easily scared, easily angered, easily frustrated. We can see that in these children. They have this basic personality. They're more difficult, okay? That's about 10% of children. And that's, I have 2 kids, you know, girl and a boy, and they were both very difficult. They both drove us nuts, okay? Especially with the sleeping and the intense crying and screaming, and those are your difficult children, okay? They have that basic personality from the beginning, and they're still difficult now that they're older. Their personality is developing, but they're a pain, okay? And there's your slow to warm up children. These are children that it takes them a little while to get going. Low intensity of reactions and negative mood, which means that they don't really overreact to things. They're more kind of fearful, but they won't just like scream and cry. They won't say much. They'll be kind of shy and cautious. They won't respond very much. Sometimes you think there's something wrong with them because they're not really too responsive. Okay, they're kind of quiet and shy, but it's mostly due to a negative mood. They're fearful is what it is. Withdraw from new situations. Like I said, they're shy. They won't easily adapt to things. It'll take them a while to start talking and start interacting with other children if they should be in daycare. So they're going to be okay, but it takes them a little while to get going, a little bit longer for them to warm up to people and then behave more normally. They're kind of shy, anxious. They don't respond very much. You don't see too much emotion from them. And then there's your hard to classify children, children that seem to have a variety of things. They don't fit into the other three categories that we talked about. So there were children left over who didn't fit those patterns, and they just called them hard to classify. And maybe your child might be in there, but this is the basic personalities that they identified at the beginning. And this will continue and develop into a kind of full-blown personality down the road. Your slow to warm up children might just be your overly shy, anxious people. Your difficult children are going to be the ones that are, going to be maybe more aggressive, more emotional, and just have more problems at, just getting along with others. And then your easy children are the ones that will be better adjusted, okay? And that will deal better with school and other people. The good news is, even if your child is difficult or slow to warm up, as they get older, they may get easier and fit more into the easy category. So they can change a little bit, but they're not easy from the beginning. Here's some more information about this. You probably understand already from what I said, what easy children are like, difficult children, slow to warm up, and then there's the hard to classify. Rhythmicity, that just has to do with how regular they are when they eat, sleep, toileting, basically pooping and peeing. You can see that easy children are regular, okay? Difficult children are irregular. And the slow to warm up child, there's no information there. They're not really one or the other. Activity level, the easy child, there's no information there, but they're somewhere in the middle. The difficult child has high activity level, a lot of fussing, a lot of crying, and when they cry and they're frustrated, they shake their little arms and legs, right? Slow to warm up child, they're going to be low activity level. They don't do much, okay? Approach withdrawal. Positive for the easy child, right? When it's something new, they handle things positively. Difficult child, more negatively, okay? More emotional, cries more, that kind of stuff. And the slow to warm up child, also more negative. They're fearful and shy. Adaptability, positive for the easy child, negative for the difficult child, and negative for the slow to warm up child. No information on sensory threshold, but I can guess. It doesn't mean that there's no information, but I can guess that sensory threshold, probably moderate for the easy child. Difficult child, sensory threshold is low, which means they're probably more difficult and more easily upset. For the slow to warm up child, probably, low, okay? Quality of mood, positive. Easy children are more positive when it comes to mood, more smiling, more laughter, more contentment. The difficult child, negative, okay? They're just more crying, more screaming, more frustration. The slow to warm up child doesn't say anything there, but I would guess it'd be more negative. They're more shy and fearful. Intensity of mood, low to moderate for the easy child. High intensity for the difficult child. They're extreme. And low for the slow to warm up child. Their mood is, and the intensity is kind of low. It takes a little while to even get them to respond or react. So there's some information there about temperament, which tells us a lot about children. And well, if you're lucky, your children will be easy children. There's also something called goodness of fit when it comes to temperament. We mentioned this at the beginning, but goodness of fit has to do with how well basically children, their basic personality fits the environment. The extent to which a child's temperament and abilities match the parents' demands and expectations, okay? The goodness of fit might be poor. If, parental demands are too great, or incompatible with the child's temperament, the child's ability. And that can cause stress and developmental problems. Let's say that the child doesn't like too much physical contact, right? But the parents do. Maybe the child is slow to warm up, you know, and doesn't like physical contact. But the parents like that a lot. That might be more stressful for the child, especially if we're talking about strangers, maybe holding the child, interacting with the child. That can cause problems, okay? Or the parents like too much stimulation. You know, they like to party, they like to have strangers around, they move around a lot. You know, they like a lot of change, basically. But the child doesn't like that very much. The child, again, might be slow to warm up, and it takes them a while to get comfortable with things. And there you are changing things up with them all the time, right? It's a lot of noise because of partings or novelty. There's a lot of new things. People come and go, you know, strangers, and that is stressful for the child. And the child might not warm up to people because the environment keeps changing. Whereas if you were to have some more stability, the child will get used to things and will eventually adapt and be okay. You know, or it could be another way. It could be, let's say that the child is an easy child and is okay with new things and stimulation and, you know, and more easily handles change. But you're the kind of parents, let's say, that, you know, are the opposite. And you don't like to see people. You like people to leave you alone. You don't go to many places. You're kind of withdrawn, let's say, as parents. So you're not really providing the kind of stimulation your child would need or your child would thrive in, because they're more, the child is more, to use the word, more extroverted, and you are more introverted. So that might not be a good fit. Or the child, let's say, is very difficult. Child is very difficult, let's say, and cries easily and is frustrated easily and is fearful very easily. But you're a mean and kind of cold kind of parent. You're very mean to your children. You yell at them a lot. You're not patient, too strict, too punishing. And what's going to happen with those difficult children is that you're going to mistreat them. You're going to, you know, traumatize them because they tend to overreact already. They're very difficult, and you don't have the patience and the love to deal with them. They require more patience, more love. Just they require better parenting. Okay, if you're if you're really mean and you beat them and you punish them and you do that stuff, when you have a difficult child, you're like I said, you're going to traumatize them. You're going to really mess them up. Okay, because they require more patience and understanding. Now, here's the thing: the easy children are, you know, are better able to handle those things. Don't get me wrong; you can still mess up the easy children if you're too mean, too punishing. But easy children are easier to raise, and they handle things better. Okay, and they deal better with, you know, with different environments. Whereas your slow to warm up children, your very difficult children do not. That's goodness of fit. You have to think about that, right? Children have their basic personality at the beginning, and if the social environment, the parental situation doesn't fit their personality, your child might not develop in the best way possible. Okay. That's it for that. Let's keep going now, and let's talk about, this leads us to talking about bonding, because we were talking about parenting and goodness of fit. Well, we need to talk about bonds, okay, establishing bonds. So you have a newborn, and, you know, this newborn is going to bond to you, okay? You know, this bonding we call attachment. So let's define attachment. Attachment is the need for proximity, strongest for infants and child. So there will be, you know, some kind of attachment that will develop. Children are born completely helpless, dependent, remember? And they rely on you for a lot of things, for everything at the beginning. And they can form a certain kind of attachment depending on how things go, okay? So in order to understand attachment a little bit, we have to understand a little bit about Bowlby's attachment theory, John Bowlby. Okay, his theory, he proposed his theory around 1969 and developed it until like 1988 and stuff. So that refers to his theory there, you know, those, you know, those years there, not his life. He did, you know, it's not like he only lived a couple of years. But according to John Bowlby, basically, well, infants, yes, they form an attachment to parents. They form a close relationship, or they try to form a close relationship with you as a parent. And these close relationships are important because attachment, these close relationships function as what he called an affect regulation device. Bowlby said basically that, you know, children need us to regulate their emotions. Affect has to do with emotion, okay? So people will seek, infants especially, will seek their attachment figures and resist separation during times of need, during times of stress. So here's the thing. You have an infant, right, completely dependent, helpless at the beginning, and they need you to provide food and comfort and keep them warm, you know, provide stimulation, all that stuff. So we seek our attachment figures, you know, even as children, okay? We want our parents to look at us and hold us and take care of us. And it's very stressful, very distressing, you know, when they leave us. Children cry very easily when mommy walks out of the room, or daddy, or when you put them down. They seek attachment. They want to be bonded to you. They want to form that close relationship with you because they need you, okay? So they will resist separation during times of stress. Like I said, they cry when you walk away. They cry when you put them down, or when they're hungry, when they're cold. You as a parent are basically someone who can help them regulate their emotions, make them feel more comforted, less fearful, less stressed. So attachment figures, usually parents, you know, provide protection. You know, you protect them, you provide support, you feed them, right? You clothe them, you do all that stuff. You provide comfort and relief. Okay, you do all those things for your infants, and the infants need this, so they bond to you because of this, okay? Attachment figures, you know, parents, usually we're talking most strongly here, the mother, is also needed and functions as what we call a secure base, okay? Also needed as a secure base to engage in exploration, affiliation with others. Let me explain that. As a parent, you need to function as a secure base for your infant, for your child. Your child basically might be scared. Let's say when somebody new walks into your room. Your child needs to know that they can count on you for protection. And what happens, let's say, is when a stranger enters the room, someone the child hasn't seen before and doesn't know, the child will become concerned, will become scared. And the child will probably, you know, run to you or walk to you and hold on to your leg like that image is showing there. They are concerned. They don't know whether they should trust this new person or not. So this child here is holding on to daddy's leg. And if daddy handles the situation in a calm manner, right, talks to the adult, no big deal, nothing to be afraid of here, then the child will calm down and the child will feel more secure and might later even interact with the adult, or even talk to the adult if the adult should ask, the other adult should ask some questions. That's a secure base. When you don't know how things are going, or something happens, something different, you go back to home base, so to speak, to your secure base, to sort of just figure out what's happening. Should I be afraid? And then if things are okay, then you can go back to exploring and go back to playing. Parents need to provide a secure base for their children. They function this way. Children run to you during times of need, during protection. You're a secure base. They rely on you for those things, okay? So children basically attachment. This is part of attachment. Children need their parental figures usually. It could be someone who's not their parents, a caregiver, let's say, if the child was adopted or something like that. But children need others, right? Their attachment figures to regulate their emotions, to regulate fear and stress, right? To feel comforted and secure, right? Of course, you feed them, you protect them, you do all those things. And as a secure base, someone they can run to for protection, should they need that. And they'll run to you for protection. They'll seek you for protection just when they're not sure, okay? And that's what Bowlby said about attachment. Children need others. We all need others, actually, to regulate our emotions. And also, you know, we need a secure base that we can run to for protection, to assess things from. And I want to point out that this continues throughout the lifespan, according to John Bowlby. We still regulate our emotions in this way. We still have our loved ones, our attachment figures, but now, instead of your mother and your father, it might be your spouse, right? Your boyfriend, your girlfriend, or it could be your, your spouse if you're married, who you run to for protection. If you get hurt, you get fired, or something happens to you, who do you call? I mean, yeah, usually you'll, you know, if you're married, you'll call your spouse. You know, you want them to help you, or you want them to comfort you. People often also call their parents, you know, during times of stress, during times of need. Okay, we do that when we're scared, when things go wrong. We seek people. We usually seek those that we're closest to, and that's usually, you know, our loved ones. You know, the person closest to you, if you're married, is probably your mother. I mean, not your mother, probably your husband, your wife, but also your mother, your father. You might call them second, or maybe first, or maybe even your close friends. You know, I might have mentioned that, I don't know if I remember if I mentioned it here for this class, but you know, a few weeks ago, it's been 2 weeks now, I was out there riding my bike, my mountain bike, you know, going up those hills and stuff like that. And I went too fast on a little turn and I fell, you know, and the bike slammed me to the ground basically. And, you know, I broke a few ribs. I had to go to the hospital. When I had that accident, I didn't know how badly hurt I was, you know. And my first thought wasn't, I got to call 911. My first thought is, I got to call my wife, you know, and let her know that I'm hurt, you know, and I need some help just in case I can't provide help for myself and I can't call myself. I didn't know how badly hurt I was. And that's what I did. Or if you remember, you know, like, well, actually, a lot of you probably can't relate to this, but some of you might be old enough. I don't know how many of you are old enough, but it's been a while now. But when 9/11 happened, when there was that terrorist attack, you know, people were shocked and scared. And what did they do is they called their parents, their loved ones, you know, their husbands, their wives. They wanted to talk to them. That's what we do as infants. That's what we do as adults. And we also need a secure base to run to, you know, when things are tough, when we're stressed out, when things are hard. We seek our loved ones. It could be your mother, your father. It could be, you know, your spouse, you know. But we still function this way. We still need others, those that we're, you know, closely bonded to, we're attached to during times of stress, during times of danger or trouble. More about this. Here's something that's very interesting. According to Bowlby, infants, and not just infants, but also adults, I'll talk about adults a bit later, but infants show a very clear 3-stage pattern of separation anxiety. By the way, I want to mention that where it says right there, CD1, 12A to C, don't pay attention to that. I don't show things in CDs anymore. I just forgot to delete that. But if there's any videos, there will be links now. And remember, I'm not going to show you guys videos during the lecture. You guys can watch them on your own. And it just gives us more time for discussion and to do other things. And because the videos don't work very well in Zoom anyway. But getting back to that three-stage pattern of separation anxiety, let me explain that. When we are separated from our loved ones, I'll talk about as an infant first. If an infant should become separated from mommy, from daddy, from the parental figure, the caregiver, they show a very clear 3-stage pattern of separation anxiety, okay? The first stage is called protest. When mommy leaves, let's focus on mommy because they're most strongly bonded to mommy usually. They focus on protest. Okay, this is when the child cries and screams and doesn't want to let go. They attempt to reestablish contact. So, you know, they hold on to your leg. They don't want you to leave. You know, they cry and they scream and they tell you, you know, that they need you. Don't leave, mommy. Don't leave me. You know, maybe you're going to work or maybe you're trying to drop them off at daycare or whatever it is. You know, we're talking about the first 2 years here. But, you know, they don't want to let go. They don't want you to leave, whether they're a few months old or, you know, 1 year old or 2 years old, or even when they're a little bit older. Okay, that's the 3-stage pattern. Okay, first it's protest. Okay, they don't want you, you know, it's them saying, don't leave me. I need you. you know? And then you leave anyway because you have to go to work or you have to drop off daycare. Even worse for them is if you're leaving them permanently, you're giving them up or you're abandoning them. They will protest at first. They cry, they scream, they don't want you to go. And then after protest, they enter the stage of despair. You've left them and there they are by themselves showing despair. They're inactive, they feel helpless. It's like they're depressed. They're not gonna talk very much. They're not going to, be that active. They're not going to play with others. They're not going to be as involved. It's like they're depressed. That's the stage of despair. They might be there, just quietly crying or feeling sad and lonely, and they're not basically active. They're not social. They're not engaging whatever they should be doing. Let's say in daycare or whatever it may be. That's the sense of despair. And then after a while, they get used to it and they enter the stage of detachment. Lack of concern, coolness toward the parent. When they enter the stage of detachment, they're okay again. They're not too concerned anymore. Coolness toward the parent. So when they enter the stage of detachment and you try to drop them off, let's say at daycare, it's like they're telling you, it's okay, mommy, you can go to work. I'll be okay. I'll be fine. And they don't really cry anymore. They don't really seem too concerned. Or you might take them to a daycare and then you open the door and they run into the daycare because they want to see their little friends, their buddies, or they want to have whatever fun they're having in there. They're in the stage of detachment now. If you should abandon them permanently, when they enter the stage of detachment, that's when they don't care that much about you anymore. When they basically, doesn't really affect them now, whether you come and go. Okay, and I want to point out something interesting about this as well, because Bowlby says that attachment, functions throughout the lifespan. So as adults, we show the same pattern. When you're separated from your loved ones, whether somebody dies or more interestingly, when let's say somebody leaves you, you have a boyfriend or a girlfriend and they leave you, okay? They dump you, so to speak. So first you enter the stage of protest. There's the crying and the screaming and the don't leave me, I need you, I'll do anything. That's protest, okay? You don't want them to leave. And then you enter despair. They leave you anyway. And then you enter the stage of despair where you're depressed, you feel miserable. You're not going out, you're not eating much perhaps, you're not hanging out with friends too much, you're not being yourself, it's like you're depressed. And then you enter the stage of detachment after that, after you get over them. Lack of concern, coolness toward that person. Should they come around, it's like, like, what are you doing here? I don't need you anymore. No, I don't want to get back with you. That kind of stuff. You're over them, so to speak. It's a clear 3-stage pattern. We show it as infants when we're separated from those that we love, those that we need, and we show it also when we're older. It's the same pattern of separation. Okay, that's Bowlby's 3-stage pattern of separation anxiety. That's what his theory of attachment says. The next part gets us to talking about attachment as well, but it's about Mary Ainsworth, and that is going to lead us into something that's going to take a while for us to talk about. So I am going to I'm going to stop here,